Let us take a breath together. A nice, deep, collective inhale and exhale. I know I always start with a breath. Some of you may have noticed that by now. It's kind of my thing these days. I'm a deeply earnest queer with anxiety and complex opinions. I contain multitudes. Of course, I'm starting with the breath. If you've heard me speak before, you might be expecting something deeply pastoral and gently inspirational and maybe even a little poetic. So I want to let you know up front with a disclaimer that today's message, it might feel a little different. It's a little spicier, hopefully a little funnier, but still full of love, still deeply you, with a reverence, holy mischief, and a splash of sacred anarchy. I don't know about how your week has been, but mine included a moment of spiritual clarity, 3 moments of spiritual chaos, and at least 1 moment where I stared into my coffee like it owed me answers. And here we are, here in this beautifully imperfect container of a Sunday morning, a space stitched together with maybe a little coffee breath and hopefully some good covenants, a space where we don't have to pretend we're fine in order to belong. Here in this beautifully imperfect container of a Sunday morning, I'm going to tell you a story. It's going to be a wild ride. It's got gender, mine, joy, very real, and hopefully just enough sacred disruption to make the ancestors raise their eyebrows. This is not a how-to guide. There's no workbook, no steps to repeat to earn enlightenment. Absolutely no guarantee that it will fit neatly into your life. I closed my document. But it is my truth, and I offer it in case some part of it resonates in your bones, nudges something loose, or reminds you that your own becoming, in all the messy shapes it takes, is sacred too. So come as you are, skeptical, sacred, slightly feral. We're building something honest here. Let's begin. So let's talk about gender. Well, actually, let's be more specific. Let's talk about my gender. I am so grateful to have a community to share this with that affirms the sacredness of every person, to share with others who believe that transformation is a part of our spiritual practice, to have a place where lived truth is continually invited and welcomed in the room. Again, I want to be very clear that I'm not here to explain transness. I'm not here to give the one and only definition and description of what it means to be non-binary. I'm not even here to tell you how to understand me. I'm here to tell you the truth about my own life and what I've learned from becoming someone I didn't know I was allowed to be. Let's also be clear that for me, coming out as non-binary and trans wasn't about escaping anything. It wasn't about erasing a past. It wasn't a rejection of who I had been. It was a recognition of truths that had been buried deep under layers of survival. I hadn't been living a lie. I hadn't been trying to trick anyone. I was doing what so many of us do, trying to stay safe, to stay accepted, trying to be lovable, trying to find belonging in a world that didn't offer me the language or the safety to live fully, to truly know myself. That's why coming out for me was about returning. It was about peeling back what I had learned to perform in a world I didn't belong in, and finally hear myself and begin listening to the parts of me that had been waiting quietly for permission to breathe. And as a Unitarian Universalist, I believe that becoming isn't a detour from the sacred, it is sacred. Because our faith teaches that revelation is not sealed, that truth unfolds, that transformation is not only possible, it's our spiritual right, and that love invited us to show up fully as ourselves, not as someone else's idea of who we should be. Love invites us to grow and be messy, and that our deepest truths, the kind we wrestle with in the quiet, has a place in this faith. So the story I'm telling It's not neat, it's not universal, it's mine. And I offer it here to you with the hope that when you are ready, it cracks open something that's been waiting quietly inside someone here too. I don't have a lot of childhood memories. I definitely had a childhood, and I know there were plenty of times that I had a lot of fun and some cool adventures, because somewhere out there are a lot of photos to provide as evidence. I used to think that's just how it was. Some people remember the color of the wallpaper in their second grade classroom. I remember studying everyone. I remember performing. I remember trying very hard to learn how to be what other people seemed to need me to be. I'm not sure if you know this, but seminary is a lot of unpacking your stuff. It's a lot of looking back and using new perspectives and lenses to better understand ourselves and how we relate to others. In that process, I've learned that I think a lot of my memory loss came from learning on that it wasn't safe to fully exist as myself. I didn't feel known, and I didn't know how to know myself. I lost connection to my body. I learned how to read a room before I learned how to read a book. And folks, I learned to read at 4. I was very tuned in to other people's expectations with the kind of precision you don't usually associate with children. I was trying to survive. The world was desperately shoving all kinds of blueprints for survival at me. Some of them came wrapped in praise. You're so mature for your age. You're such a good listener. You're such a helper. Such a reader. Others came wrapped in judgmental, awkward silence. Deep beneath all of that, there was a consistent low hum, like something in me was misaligned or off frequency. Every encounter felt like I had wandered onto a stage but didn't know my lines and couldn't quite figure out which part exactly I was supposed to be playing. I didn't have the language for gender or queerness or neurodivergence. I didn't have words like non-binary or autistic or trans. I had feelings that were incredibly hard to name and even harder to share with anyone else. I became what I thought I needed to be, to stay loved, to be accepted, to belong. And to be honest, I was really good at it. I could blend in, shapeshift, adjust. I became fluent in pleasing. Somewhere deep in my soul was a very tired inner child, wearing a misfitted unitard, gripping a spangly microphone, frantically performing other people's expectations at a talent show I never signed up for. And it never seemed to end. My unraveling didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single lightning strike that split the sky and said, "Now is the moment you become." It was slower than that. It didn't even begin with gender. It began with grief. The first big thread I remember coming loose was when my dad died, just after my twins were born. That collision of grief and new life cracked something open in me. I was holding beginnings and endings in the same breath. And suddenly, I could feel questions rising up in me that I couldn't ignore anymore. Is this the life I want to be living? Is this the version of me I want my children to grow up watching? Is this the legacy I want to leave behind? I sure didn't have any answers, but once the questions arrived, I couldn't go back to pretending everything made sense. Over the next few years, more threads began to pull, unraveling gently at times, and others ripping open entire sections of my life. I began to notice the ways I had disappeared inside the performance of a life. I had started to feel the ache of unreleased truths stored in my body. The life I had built so carefully began to feel less like home and more like constricting armor. Armor I'd assembled out of duty and fear and other people's expectations. It had gotten me this far, but it didn't fit anymore. Things I once loved began to give me panic. I was uncovering repressed memories, painful ones, trauma that had shaped my sense of safety. The growing realization that I had no idea who I really was beneath all the strategies I had used to survive. And yet, in my growing sense of grief, also, I began to encounter wonder. As I unraveled, I got to witness my daughter become herself, the delight she radiated, the ways she showed up fully, freely, with great exuberance. That lit a fire in me I hadn't realized had gone cold. She wasn't reinventing herself, she was simply being, and I wanted that. I wanted that kind of joy, that kind of freedom. I wanted to know what it felt like to be unabashedly me. I didn't know the language yet, but I had the ache. So I took a wobbly step forward and came out as queer, as the carefully constructed life I'd been performing came undone. And yes, it hurt, and not just me. I have to continually remind myself that it wasn't really my life that crumbled. It was the version I had been told to build. Around that time, my kids were diagnosed with ADHD and autism, all 4 of them. And in the overwhelm, I started learning everything I could. I read the books, I listened to the podcasts, I made charts, and somewhere in the middle of that deep dive, I had a realization that only can be described as, wait a minute. Turns out I wasn't just quirky. I wasn't failing. I was neurodivergent too. It was like finding a user manual for a machine I'd been using my entire life and realizing I'd been following the wrong directions. Suddenly, so many things started to make sense. The overwhelm, the masking, the exhaustion, the way I could read a room better than myself. I wasn't broken. I'd just never been accommodated. I had been forced to conform in ways that damaged me. How was I supposed to know who I was when I'd spent my whole life being told who I should be? The disconnection, the exhaustion, the relentless people-pleasing. Of course I hadn't known who I was. I'd never been given the space to ask. So it was my first day as a UU religious professional. I was on the mountain, a UU spiritual retreat center in North Carolina. It's gorgeous, amazing, you should go. I wanted to bring my full self to this work, to show up with integrity, until I was asked to share my pronouns. I panicked. And I did what any slightly feral queer person does when asked a simple question. I spiraled. I tried all the pronouns. I studied neo-pronouns. I held existential debates with myself on long hikes in the forest, and nothing felt right. So I said, my pronouns are none. And instead of confusion or pushback, I was met with kindness. There were questions, of course. This was new for many. The beauty was that these questions weren't asked to challenge me or passive-aggressively change my mind. They were asked in order to understand me. And that acceptance, that spaciousness to be, did something to me. And it followed me home. I was learning that people didn't need me to be finished to respect me. They just needed me to be honest, authentic, myself. When I changed my pronouns, people adjusted. When I changed them again, it wasn't weird. When I didn't feel trans enough, my people reminded me I was valid. I was allowed to try. I was allowed to change. I was allowed to not know. Something sacred was becoming. I was unfolding. And not for someone else's idea of me. I was becoming myself for me. I am definitely doing it in the messiest, upside down, deeply honest way possible. A way I didn't get to become as a kid. A sort of divine do-over of adolescence. Only with better understanding and a lot more back pain. This second becoming, this deeply sacred return to myself, hasn't been clean. It's been the exact opposite of linear. It wasn't always kind, but it was mine. And it has been so, so holy. And somewhere amid the loss and the learning and the unlearning, that mess began to take an unexpected shape. It became joy. Not performative joy, not relief, not as a reward, but as a witness. Real joy. sacred joy. Joy that feels like coming home. Not all at once, not in a dazzling burst of clarity, but little by little, breath by breath, it arrived. I started to feel joy in my body, the joy of being seen, the joy of being honest, the joy of walking through the world without constantly editing myself for someone else's comfort, the joy of saying, here I am, and knowing that was enough. It wasn't that all the pain disappeared, it was that I was no longer alone inside of it. I laugh louder now, I cry more easily, I dance more terribly, and I feel more present in my body than I ever did before. And this joy, it didn't arrive once I was finished. It didn't show up because I'd finally gotten myself figured out. I haven't. It showed up because I stopped hiding. I was allowed to be. And that to me is holy. As a Unitarian Universalist, I believe in a faith that blesses the unfolding. A faith that says revelation is not sealed, that my truth is messy and it will arrive in its own time and will always, always be sacred. A faith that holds transformation not as a problem to fix, but as a gift to embrace. A faith that celebrates pluralism. There is a space for me, for you, for all the complex and beautiful ways people come to know themselves. And most of all, a faith that centers love. Not the easy kind, but the kind that makes room for becoming. This joy I've found, it isn't neat, it isn't universal, but it's mine. And if you are somewhere on that path, if you're just starting to ask questions or are already somewhere in the middle of the undoing, maybe even trying to piece something new together, I want you to know, you are not too late. You are not broken. You are not alone. Becoming is holy, and your joy, whatever it looks like, is sacred too. Here's my blessing to you. From one beautiful mess in progress to another, may you remember that becoming doesn't require a plan. May your truth show up exactly when it's ready, and may you greet it like an old friend you didn't realize you missed. May your joy be real, even if it's loud, even if it's late, especially when it's weird. May you stop asking for permission to be who you already are. May you let yourself change and change again and change again until it finally starts to feel like living. And may you always know deep down in your bones that you are sacred, even when you're uncertain, even when you're becoming, even when you're flailing, laughing. Take with you the holy mischief of becoming. Let it ring in your bones. Go tender, go curious, go queer, go questioning. But most of all, go as yourself. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are not alone. And you are definitely not finished. Bless your becoming. May it be weird. May it be holy. May it be yours. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.